Welcome, everybody. If I could call us to order, I'm David Meyer. I'm the dean here for those of you I've not had the chance to meet yet. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to welcome you and to say how proud we are at Brooklyn Law School to be able to host this event and this very distinguished panel of speakers. This is an exciting day at Brooklyn Law School because this program is really part of a theme of back-to-back programs. I'm just coming from another event in the law school building focused on digital empires and regulating digital technology around the world. And of course, this event focusing on the digital future and possibilities in politics and governance is another hugely important dimension of these questions that are very much at hand. So we're very honored by the distinguished panel. I will defer to others in introducing them, but welcome. I should acknowledge this space here in File Hall. This is both an important part of the law school, the home to many of us, including to myself. This is a residence hall, but we're very fortunate to have this magnificent event space overlooking New York and Brooklyn. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Professor Jonathan Askin, who will lead us off. So thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Dave. I'm not going to say more than 1 minute's worth of stuff because we've got these illustrious panelists here, and as long as we have them, we want to hear from them. So 2 things I want to say. If you get a chance, take a look out the windows. We have a 270-degree breathtaking view of essentially all of New York, Manhattan, Queens, the harbor. We used to run these network resiliency events here after Sandy, and you could see everything that Sandy had devastated. But if you look that way, you can also see the beginnings of America's creative spark. So look out there and see what's going on in our neighborhood. Second point, my ulterior motive. I want to come clean on my ulterior motive. A few months ago, my students and I were asked to help write a forward-looking constitution for a breakaway nation state. And we started thinking and brainstorming about how that was going to look. And a lot of that sort of snowballed into what could you do if you could greenfield society, or if you had to brownfield society, how would that look? Can you salvage America? Do we need actually to create our own seasteading space to create something from scratch? So there's all sorts of issues going on. How can we deploy new technology tools to advance democracy in the digital age? So Jerome and I got to speaking about that, and we thought this is the perfect venue, the perfect crew to bring together. So afterwards, my students and I are committed to running a legal hackathon on the issue. We'll talk about this after, so if you stay and linger, we're going to talk about what we've learned here tonight, how we expand on it, and how we might be able to join lawyers, law students, technologists, designers, bring together all of our collective ideas, think outside the sandbox, inside the sandbox, to try to reimagine what democracy can look like in the digital age. So listen with an ear towards that. Thanks. Jerome?
Everybody hear me? Everybody hear me? No? Thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Jerome Grazioli. I'm a BLS alum from the class of 2019. Before we get started, I just want to thank the law school for hosting us, Professor Askin, the student organizations who sponsored the event, BLIP, CUBE, the AL, the ACLA, the ACS, and Legal Hackers, as well as Liz Alpert and her team for helping put everything together behind the scenes. I'd also be remiss if I didn't give a quick plug here for the alumni who like these events and want to see more of them, want to get more involved. Write a check to some of these student organizations and help them grow their budget so that they can do more things like this. I believe Giving Day is on March 28th, so don't be shy. Take out your checkbooks. Maybe you'll get your name on a wall somewhere. Lastly, while we're on the subject, I want to thank these speakers for taking the time to come to Brooklyn Heights on a Monday night to spend the evening with us. Between the 4 of them, we have 2 PhDs and 3 law degrees. So I think we're going to be in good hands. They're all published
or you
author.
should hold on to your wallets, David.
They're all published authors many times over, so I implore you on your way home tonight, open up Amazon, buy their books, watch them on YouTube, follow them on social media, especially the students in the room. You can learn a lot from their careers. So with that, let me introduce our esteemed panelists. To my left is Dr. Beth Novak, Professor of Experiential AI at Northeastern University, where she directs the Burns Center for Social Change. She's one of the world's leading authorities on government innovation and AI, having served as the first ever United States Deputy Chief Technology Officer under the Obama administration. She's the founder of the White House Open Government Initiative and was senior advisor for open government for UK Prime Minister David Cameron. To her left is Dr. Charles Whelan, Professor of Public Policy at Dartmouth College, New York Times bestselling author, economist, founder of Unite America, and one of the pioneers of the centrist movement. Then we have Mr. Anthony Scaramucci, who all of you know probably from what will go down as one of the funniest firings in presidential history. Are we safe to say that?
I'm glad you got that out in the open.
There's Scaramucci.
Some people say I had a brief stay in the White House. I'm like, got to tell them I got fired.
He's an entrepreneur, founder of Skybridge Capital, the SALT Conference political fundraiser, former White House communications director, and I'm sure a very happy Bitcoin investor the past few months. And then lastly, we have Mr. Yang, who all you know from his impressive presidential campaign in 2020. Mr. Yang's also an entrepreneur, founder of Venture for America. He served as the presidential ambassador for global entrepreneurship under President Obama, and most recently the founder of the Forward Party. As the 2024 election cycle begins to heat up, tomorrow's Super Tuesday, next Thursday night is the State of the Union address. We thought now was a perfect time to have this conversation so we all can head into the election with a healthier mindset before things get crazy. So our objective here tonight is going to be to discuss how to innovate the American political system, create space for a healthier and more productive form of politics in this country, and offer younger people who are just beginning to form their own political philosophies a better framework through which to view and talk about politics. And if at the end we still have time, we'll do some Q&A, but I'd like to get everybody out of here on time if I can. For the speakers, I'll direct questions directly at you, but if you want to jump in, feel free to at the end. To start, I'll go to you, Professor Whelan. Catherine Gale wrote in her book, The Politics Industry, that America's political system has become the primary cause of our decline and the preeminent barrier to addressing the very problems it was designed to solve. For more context, polling shows that we've become more divided philosophically than at any other point in our lifetimes. We've had an underproductive Congress, a dysfunctional Congress that's racked up a $33 trillion deficit. And some of our citizens are even disillusioned enough to storm the Capitol building in protest of an election. Yet somehow we're faced with the same two candidates, same two choices. So what's going wrong in our democracy right now, and what's at stake if we don't start to get it working better?
Well, thank you all for coming. This is a really important topic. Catherine Gale and her co-author, Michael Porter. Michael Porter teaches at Harvard Business School, which is relevant. They were the first to use, to my knowledge, the term duopoly to describe the two political parties. And around that time, when I was first beginning this venture of what we would now call centrism, I used to go to folks, particularly people in the private sector who were at that time not aware, I think, fully aware of the political danger. And I'd say, look, let me describe for you an industry where there are two incumbent firms. They're wildly unpopular. The younger of the two firms was founded around the time of the Civil War, and everybody thinks we can, oh, I want to invest. You're like, where do I write the check? I'm like, well, I've just described the Republican and the Democratic Party. And so they have drilled down on that, and I think Catherine's line is, the system isn't broken, it's fixed for the incumbents who are in it. It's become self-serving. So I want to frame the discussion tonight. I love the topic of innovation. Can we do better? And I want to drill down on what we're trying to do better at which is governance. I teach governance to undergrads and business school students, and the analogy I give them, which is trivial at first, but when you think about it, it's less trivial, is imagine you're with 4 friends, you're trying to order a pizza, you've only got enough money for 1 large pie, and one person says, the meat lover is really, really good, and the other person says, well, I'm vegan, and another person is gluten intolerant, and the 4th person is lactose intolerant. You're like, okay, well, we still got to order our pizza, right? And somehow you got to come to some agreement if you want to eat, right? That is communal decision-making, which is governance. And of course, it's going to be hard with 330 million people. Pizzas may be trivial. AI is not trivial. Abortion is not trivial. Israel-Gaza is not trivial. So we need to get better at making communal decisions. And innovation is anything that allows us to do that more effectively, to get what more people want and to deal with the problems like AI that are, if not existential, potentially existential.
And Professor Novak, now that we're talking about AI, you can think back in history to the invention of transformative technologies, whether it's, and their effects on elections, whether it's FDR and the radio, JFK and the television, President Obama and President Trump with social media. What role do you see AI playing in this election?
So absolutely, but I want to pick up on what you're saying. AI does create, on the one hand, a potential existential threat, but I think it also creates tremendous opportunities, and I'm glad you sort of put this in this historical lineup with other technologies. So we hear a lot in the media about our elections and AI. We worry about the deep fake problem. But at the same time, AI can help us, as it's doing in India, better authenticate voters before they go to the polls. AI, yes, we have the deepfake problem, but AI can also help me create very cheaply and easily educational videos, training videos, and other materials that can make it cheaper to run for office. We have news just this week about how bad, for example, the current commercial LLMs are doing in terms of responding when you ask them a question about electoral information, they're getting it wrong. But that's only because we're not building the chatbot that gives it to you correctly. We have these conversational agents that could allow us to provide 24/7 responsible, ethical, correct information to people about our elections in the way that we have not been able to do before. So I am actually deeply excited about what AI could do for us if we start to have a more balanced conversation like this one about the opportunities for innovation. And yes, we do have to think about how we're going to regulate AI as well, but AI, again, is helping us to do that in new ways in terms of creating the ability for more people to be part of the conversation. I just today got off a call about doing outreach on a national survey that we're running, a national outreach, where AI is helping us to reach out to parents across the country about the challenge of literacy in this country. We can listen to people better, we can synthesize what they're saying to us, and not only can the organizers hear it, but the public can hear the responses because AI is so good at helping us to manage large quantities of information. So I'm excited about this as a technology to help us with our democracy.
Mr. Yang, you've written that the process of running for office requires qualities that often don't make for great leaders. And often the right candidates are discouraged from running for office due to shallow or intense scrutiny of the political media. Tell us a little bit about what's wrong with the media culture and why it's not designed to produce the best leaders.
Well, thank you for that question. You brought back some. I'm gonna run a poll very quickly. What do you all think the approval rating is for U.S. Congress as we're here together tonight? 20, 11, 30, it's in that range. Let's call it 15%, 16. It goes between 15 and 22, depending upon the poll. What is the re-election rate for incumbent members of Congress? 94%. It's a better win rate than the Kevin Durant era Golden State Warriors, Jordan era Bulls. So when Charles talks about the two incumbents, businesses, I speak to business audiences all the time and I say, how would your customers feel if 4 out of 5 of them were unhappy or frustrated and you changed absolutely nothing? That's the way most Americans feel about our political system most of the time. The reason why you have these disparate numbers is that 90% of the congressional districts in this country have been drawn to be either blue or red and are not competitive in the general. There's no suspense as to who's going to win the general election. To the extent there is any suspense, it's in the primary. So if you're a current member of Congress, the only way you can lose your seat is if you run afoul of your party's base, the most extreme 8 to 10% of voters. And you saw this when 10 Republican House members voted to impeach Trump after January 6th. How many of them made it back to the primaries? 2. 2 out of 10 in a system where generally 94% of incumbents cruise. So they got the message. And this plays into the media environment, is that the media will make you think that these two parties are clashing around the country. It's actually factually not the case. 70% of the country is essentially one-party rule. And you only have maybe 8 or 10% of districts that are genuinely contested at any moment in time. If there's something that the two parties can agree on, it's that we should avoid competition if at all possible. And they've made a pact. They've been like, you get that zone, we get this zone, we'll pretend to fight it out over here. And the reason why so many people are upset is that how we do has little to no relationship with the incentives of those in power, including keeping office. The myth in American life is that our leaders have to make 51% of us happy to stay in power. It's not really true. They have to keep the 8 to 10% most ideological extreme voters off their case, which then transforms their media incentives. So you have these two parties that are being held captive by the 8 to 10% most ideological and extreme, anti-Semitic in some cases. And then you have media organizations separating into the teams and tribes and saying, look, this is the constant clash. And then you have social media pouring gasoline on the whole thing. That's the environment. And I want to give credit to Charles for starting Unite America, which is going to spend tens of millions doing the one thing that could get us out of this mess, which is to replace the party primaries that empower the 8 to 10% on each wing and replace it with an anyone can vote for anyone all-party primary, as they just did in Alaska. And this would make the myth of the 51% having to be happy to get reelected actually the case. And the exhibit in Alaska is so powerful. How many of you have heard of Mary Peltola? How many of you have heard of Sarah Palin? Mary Peltola is the person who beat Sarah Palin in that congressional race. And you have to think about how that happened. The reason that happened was because it was a ranked choice voting race and Mary Peltola edged around the second round 52-48. If you have a normal process, what happens? Sarah Palin wins the Republican primary, Mary Peltola wins the Democratic primary, and then Sarah Palin wins. Same thing happened at the Senate level. Lisa Murkowski managed to beat a Trump-endorsed challenger. Lisa Murkowski was the only Republican senator who voted to impeach Donald Trump, who was up for re-election in 22. But she didn't have a Republican primary because Charles's organization helped get rid of the primaries in Alaska for $6 million, which I'm going to suggest is the greatest value any of us have ever seen. You get Sarah Palin out, Lisa Murkowski in, Mary Peltola in, for $6 million in a system where we're going to spend $10 billion beating each other up and hating on each other in November. So Charles and his organization, Unite America, are one of the beacons of hope in this incoherent, corrupted system. And my job is to try and get more people to see the light that is our way out.
Mr. Scaramucci, on one of your 10 days as communications director.
Hold on a second. It was 11 days.
Does that,
Don't jip me out of that,
Is that-
last day. I got fired on that last
does
day.
it include weekends or not?
It did include weekends. You,
All right,
work,
so-
you work on the weekends in the
All right,
White
okay.
House. Just ask the professor. She knows. You work on the weekends.
I teed you up
Don't
for
jip
that
me out
one.
of 9.1% of my federal career. Go ahead.
Did you get a pension or not?
You know what? So I didn't take, if you really want to know, I didn't take any pay because thank God, America's been great to me. So the GSA makes you take $1, and I have a 2-cent check from the GSA framed in my office at home. All right, but go ahead, no pension. But go ahead, keep going.
So
If you
on
want
one
to
of
talk
the,
about the day I got fired, I'm happy to share with you. It was absolutely brutal. Okay, go ahead.
you gave an interview on the White House lawn one of those days. I think it was to Chris Cuomo. And you described America in 1776 as a disruptive startup. Can you talk about what you meant by that and perhaps why you think that entrepreneurial spirit in government is so important right now?
Well, I still believe that. I still believe America broadly is a disruptive startup. I mean, think about our society. Think about the people in this room. We each have an interesting, likely immigrant story to the country, and that meant that there were family members in the country that had to take risks to leave the other country to come to America. So that would be my grandparents, who left a jobless Italy back in the 1920s, or in one case, my grandfather in 1900. And so the country, in my mind, is still this risk-taking, amazing culture where we'll continue to innovate and likely from an economic position continue to dominate. But I think what the three other panelists are saying, which has me super worried, is why we have this great innovation and this great startup mentality in the country from a business and academic perspective. We have this sort of stultification of the country in government. And so there's ways to fix it. I mean, some of Charlie's ways or perhaps some of Andrew's ways, but the people in power actually don't want to fix it because then they would have to leave power and they really don't want that. And ultimately, the people in power, and I'm sorry to say this to you, but I think you know this already, they're really there to serve themselves. They're more interested in serving themselves than the American people. Just look at what they do, because if you're 78 or 81 years old, you probably shouldn't be running for president. If you're Nancy Pelosi at 83, you should probably give somebody a chance. You know, Chuck Grassley, I think he's like George Washington's great uncle or something like that. And he's going to try to stay, you know, and try to do it for a Ouija board. So to me, this is a sign of like selfishness and not service. And so you can fix it. You know, you would, you know, I mean, no one would do this, but you could have mandatory voting like you do in Australia. You could fine people if they don't show up to vote. They have to exercise their right to vote, and you'd cut out the 8 to 10%. You'd get right into the bell curve of the less extreme people, more moderate people. These are all marketing competitions. These people would change their tune immediately. I watched people who hated Donald Trump. When he won, they became immediate sycophants, right? Lindsey Graham. I mean, the real guy that gives me a heartache is Kevin McCarthy. You know, Kevin McCarthy could have punched Donald Trump right through the ropes on the 7th of January. He hates Donald Trump, but he wants to be in power, so he's flying around on the campaign plane with him. So you could mandatory vote. You could have a constitutional amendment that stops the gerrymandering, where the congressional districts look more like the geometric shapes that we recognize from geometry, as opposed to these jigsaw puzzles. And then the last thing, and this is something I really admire Andrew about, is you can think like a startup entrepreneur as a politician. Now, Barack Obama did that. Barack Obama looked at the field and said, hey, I've got the Clintons I'm running against. They've got 30 endorsements from 30 great governors. And I'm going to create a whole new market of Democrats and a whole new voting base, and I'm going to pinch the Clintons out of the presidency. Whether you like it or not, Donald Trump did that. Donald Trump said, okay, there's a huge base of people that are unhappy with what's going on in America. They're no longer serviced by the blue-collar people, no longer serviced by the Democrats. I'm going after those people. And so the most powerful voting bloc in the country is 144 million strong. They vote the exact same way in every election. It's the non-voter. Okay, and so we have to get politicians to go after the non-voter and say, listen, I know you're cynical. The duopoly has been designed to make you cynical. Let's bring you back into the swimming pool with ideas that matter to you and your family. And so those are ways we could fix it. But it's going to be very hard.
So Professor Whelan, talking about actual things we could do to fix it, we saw Tom Schwazi win George Santos' seat, and I saw him running ads as a centrist. He was marketing himself as a centrist. But we seem to be stuck in the paradigm of left and right in Congress. Can you sort of tell us centrism as a political philosophy, what it can do to Congress if you only attack the Senate, let's say, and not the presidency or the House?
I don't like the word centrism. I've been stuck with it. It was the title of my book. Like, it's terrible. I'm like, I know, but we can't come up with anything better. To me, it means two things, and it's going to follow naturally from what you've heard already. The first is this group of people whose views are kind of near the center of a bell curve. Or if you're a football person, kind of between the 40-yard lines. It's where most people are on most issues. Whether it's gun violence, the deficit, infrastructure, there are a lot of what I would describe as kind of 65% solutions. They're not perfect, they're not the meat lover pizza, but everybody can eat it. And if we did it, people would say that was good. The best example, I'm glad you brought up the debt at the beginning. We kind of glossed over that. The thing, I don't like the debt, but the thing I like about it as an issue is it is quantifiable. Nobody can argue it's not a problem that's getting worse. Republicans would like to spend less, Democrats would like to tax more, but you can't give everybody what they want. Simpson-Bowles, which was the commission that kind of came together and had a 65% solution, is what we have to do on a whole host of issues. So what does centrism mean? Two things. One is the people who subscribe to those views. You say, yeah, I'm very comfortable with that. But of late, I think it also means people who might be ideologically more extreme, but are willing to work with those who have something in common. And this is, I've gotten to know Judd Gregg, who's the former senator from New Hampshire, a relatively conservative guy. He set in motion Simpson-Bowles, the process, and he talks about his collaborative relationship with Ted Kennedy. And they only had like 4% of their thinking in common, but whenever it overlapped, for the sake of the country, they said, hey, let's legislate on the 4%. The problem with the tribal notion that we've described is, oh yeah, I may agree with you guys on 25%, but I can't do anything that might be a win for you. And so you retreat.
No. And a U.S. senator said this to me, and this is how bad it's gotten. She said, an issue is now worth more to us unaddressed than addressed. Because if I reach across the aisle and compromise, I get beaten up by the base, I'm ideologically impure, I worked with the enemy, and my job security goes down. What happens if I let the problem fester? I can get you mad, I can raise money, I get votes 94% and come and re-elect. So you can see that on both sides. They'll just point and look at it and say, let's let this thing linger until the next election. And by the way, there's always a next election. One exhibit for this is Marco Rubio, 11 years ago, said, hey, bipartisan immigration reform. Do y'all remember that? And then what happened the next week? I'm just kidding. I recant. What happened to him that week was that his colleagues got to him and said, hey, man, what are you doing? We do this. We're going to take a beating. We do nothing. We're fine. So you can put immigration in there. You can put AI in there. You can put climate change. You can just put issue after issue. And that's one reason why we feel the way we do.
We can just put a finer point under something that Andrew said earlier, which is the primary problem, which is if you are in a gerrymandered seat, red or blue, and you vote for a 65% solution, by definition, you have angered one base or the other. So if it's gerrymandered, the only way you're going to lose, to their previous point, is by angering your primary voters. And the only way you're going to do that is by subscribing to one of these 65% solutions. So we have engineered a system that is inimical to doing what we have to do to solve is too strong a word, to ameliorate most of these issues.
Professor Novak, you work more in government innovation rather than political innovation. And I'm curious, you wrote in a Fast Company magazine article, I think earlier this month, that Congress can use technology to speed up its operations, make their operations more efficient, and deepen its connection with the American people. What do you see as areas of government that are ripe for digital innovation, and how can delivering those government services better through those technologies ultimately lead to healthier politics?
Let me connect the dots between this excellent question and what you've been hearing here. There has been a systematic effort over the last generation on the part of both parties to completely eviscerate the institutional ability to solve problems. So if you take on the federal side, for example, population of the country since 1950 has increased about 120%, but the size of our government has not at all. Yet we have new agencies since that time, the EPA, NASA, you name it, Homeland Security. On the congressional side, it's worse in terms of the evisceration of whole analytical units of Congress that have been gotten rid of, the obliteration of staff, the reduction of staff. We just institutionally don't have the capacity that we once had to be able to address problems. And as you're hearing, it's because we don't want to address the problems is a big reason behind it. But there has been a political effort to make it really difficult for government to be able to do its job. And that has serious consequences. You know, it matters. You may remember the Abbott baby food deaths that took place last year. How many people do you think are responsible for inspecting baby food in this country? Serious issue. How many people do you think work in that unit for the whole country? Guesses?
30.
Closer, bingo, less, 9. It's 9 people who have responsibility for doing that. We have 1,200 people at the FDA who are responsible for inspecting all of our farms, all of our chain restaurants, all of the food safety things that they have to do. That's just one example. We lack the capacity to do our jobs effectively. And the same thing is true for Congress. I remember when the pandemic hit, I was part of a group that had to run a training for past members of Congress in how to use Zoom because we couldn't do it with current members. They were too scared to try it. So we had to do it with past members, people who were no longer in office, to be able to show them what was possible. So, okay, fast forward a little bit, people have learned how to use Zoom and Teams and whatnot as a result of the pandemic, but we are nowhere when it comes to how we work. Not only does it come to our political parties, do they date from the Civil War era, but our mechanisms of government, what happens the day after election, which I would argue is as important, also hasn't evolved quite as much as we need it to. So there's a lot more to be said there about the ways in which we can be, and many governments are embracing technology now, and I think everybody here has had a role in that and has been a fan of using technology to be able to solve problems more effectively. So whether it's putting government online so that we can deliver services 24/7, whether it's now using AI to simplify how we talk to people, how we communicate with people, to make government more responsive, or as we're seeing, the ability to use technology now to incorporate citizens into the decision-making process. So what I'm particularly excited about is places like Brazil, where they're going out and using technology to engage the public in actually making decisions on behalf of their legislature, or embracing AI to be able to do cost-benefit analysis and forecasting on the impact of legislation, or in Belgium, where they have a standing panel of citizens that sits with their legislature next to the professional politicians day in and day out, so you have a representative sample of the public actually involved in how decision-making happens. So lots more to say, but we have a lot of innovation to do, not just on election day, but what happens the other 364 days of the year.
Out of the governments that you've seen implementing some of these technologies, who do you think is doing it the best?
Oh, well, I'd be remiss if I didn't shout out Phil Murphy in New Jersey, of course. We were just singing his praises a minute ago. So I wouldn't just look at the federal level. There's a lot happening in states and in cities as well. I mean, I think around the world we're seeing innovations. You know, there's, of course, countries like Estonia that always come to mind when we think of digital government, or Singapore that have been really leaders in the use of technology in government. But I'm excited about the fact that in New Jersey, we were one of the first states to go out and embrace the responsible use of AI to serve residents. That when we deliver a digital service, we do it with citizens, not just for them. We ask people how we can do a better job. And when they write back to us, we use AI to help us listen to what they're telling us so that we can synthesize the thousands of comments that we're taking in. And we can be a more conversational and more responsive government. That when we have a call center, and we know that we have the data about the questions people are calling in about, so we can really quickly write new menu options using AI so that you can get your call resolved faster about your anchor tax relief benefit or your unemployment insurance or something else, because we're using AI to be able to give you the information that you need faster and better. So I'm excited about what a lot of the experimentation that's happening, but it's still just at the beginning, and we have a lot more we need to do.
Be patient, everybody.
But not too patient.
No, don't be patient. Be demanding.
Yeah.
Be demanding. And more importantly, come and join us. Come and help fix it.
This next question I'll direct, I guess, to the three of you. If there's so much demand, there's 42% independence, and there's so much demand for an alternative to the two options we have, why hasn't a group of civic-minded, moderate billionaires gotten together and put a ton of money into an alternative?
Oh my God, I'm the authority on this topic.
I've tried and failed, so you go first.
Oh no, you haven't failed, man. I mean, United America is thriving.
This is 3.0.
I mean, really, he has been. through the wars on this journey, and I am his successor in many ways. So we should spend more time together, Charles. All right. So 42 is a little low. It's more like 49%.
It's the fastest growing political group in America.
Yeah, and for young people, it's 2/3. Young people don't think either party has it going on. So why are we so stuck? It's because if you get down to the actual granular level where races are run, it's impractical to nearly impossible to win a lot of these races as an independent. What's interesting is that Charles's organization, when they decided to take this on, you're not going to believe this, folks. You know, some of the most winnable races as an independent are U.S. Senate races. Very, very hard, but that's actually still more feasible than a lot of these local races because it's statewide. You'll have interest at a certain level. You can get energy and attention. A local race, it's almost a sure loser in a lot of these environments because a certain number of partisans are going to show up. They're going to pull the lever for that party. They don't know anything other than the letter next to their name. And so I started the Forward Party, and I did something. How many of you have read a book where it did a great job for 200 plus pages making you animated about a problem, and then you're like, okay, what are we going to do about it at the end? And then you were completely dissatisfied.
We call that the Chapter 10 problem in public policy.
So I did that. And then at the end of the book in chapter 10, it's actually more like chapter 18 or whatever, but I said, the only way out of this is to turn off the party primaries. You can't do that from within the two-party system, so you need to create an independent third-party movement, not left or right, but forward. And I will now start the Forward Party. And I knew as I wrote those words, I was like, I think I just signed up for the next 5 to 10 years of my life. So I'm sitting before you today, the co-chair of the third biggest party in the country by resources. Now, there's a very, very big drop-off between 2 and 3. So what this really means is we managed to outdo the Greens and Libertarians over this last period. And we have about 40 elected officials who are aligned with the Forward Party. The mayor of Fort Collins, mayor of Newtown, Connecticut, like a bunch of people. And there are 2 opportunities in the system. And I'm going to paint a picture with you, and this brings us back to Beth's vision about, let's say, imagine voting on your smartphone in a presidential election, which if you say, hey, why don't you do that? And then some parties will say, it's insecure. And then if you manage to prove, no, it's actually totally buttoned up and secure, what you'll find is that the parties actually have no interest in having everyone vote. Because right now they know exactly who's going to vote. They know how to make sure that the right person wins. And so if you open the franchise, then it actually opens up uncertainty. That's why both parties came out against nonpartisan primaries and ranked choice voting, because it's less clear what the win number is.
And vote by mail and anything else.
Yeah. They don't like any of that innovation. But check this out, guys. There are 2 opportunities in this messed up system for the independent movement, third party movement, whatever. Number 1, there are 515,000 local races around the country, 70% of which are uncontested or uncompetitive. It turns out that neither party is really going and fighting it out in the other party's turf. If you go out to rural Arkansas, do you think there's a Democrat running? There is not. You go to Harlem, do you think there's a Republican running? There is not. So there are actually selective opportunities you can do to run up races and victories in those environments. That's how we got to 40. We get to, let's call it hundreds, 1,000. It turns out that a lot of county executive and mayoral spots are technically nonpartisan. So you could, like we had the mayor of Fort Collins just raise her hand and said, I'm tired of apologizing for this team or that team. I'm now Forward Party. And then the people in her town have no idea what that means. But that's cool because she's like, no, what it means is I'll just do what you guys want me to do. Like I don't need to apologize. And here's the other opportunity, is the presidential election. Now the presidential election in 24, in my opinion, is not the opportunity. And Anthony and I were just joking about how if Trump wins, then I think he's on the bad list.
I'm on the naughty list.
He's on the naughty list. We have
been there before.
We have mutual friends, and Anthony's a high character human with fortitude, which is a rarity in American life. It's one reason I like and admire him so much. There are other people that are on the naughty list as well. I think Trump is the favorite to win, which is super sad.
He won't win, though.
I hope you're right. No, we'll do this thing. But imagine this. So imagine a third-party primary that you could vote for on your smartphone, and your vote is verified via a personalized QR code that gets sent to your mailing address. Very hard to defraud. And so in that third-party primary is Mark Cuban, The Rock, Matthew McConaughey, me, Michael Bloomberg, like whomever you want, in this third-party primary, and you're voting, and then the legacy parties would be left saying, no, 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 that is not real. What is real is waiting to hear what 6% of Iowans think. And then you'll be like, wait a minute, that makes 0 sense. Like, I can barely find Iowa. So that is the major weakness. By the way, everything I'm describing, 100% legit, because if you're a political party, which we are, you can design your nomination process however you want. We could say, you know, our nomination process is Americans actually get to vote on their smartphone, and we're going to verify it via a personalized QR code. And then if millions of Americans were participating in that way, and then the legacy parties would be left saying, no, 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 it's very, very hard to put that genie back in the bottle, because you all would be like, wait a minute, I vastly prefer this. And if, let's say Mark Cuban emerges from that, and then the rest of us endorse him, and then we all fan out being like, hey, Cuban's the guy. Even if you were for someone else, you're like, I'm with this gang, because this gang actually cares about me and what I think in genuine democracy and is trying to give it back to the people. By the way, I presented this plan to Nancy Jacobson and No Labels in DC. I said, look, your problem is that you're going to go from an establishment that people don't like to another form of establishment that people probably won't be that excited about. You have to include people and get them excited and let them own it, and then put it in their hands and say, if they choose someone that you don't like, we're still gonna go your direction. You choose veggie pizza, we're gonna eat the fucking veggie pizza.
With cauliflower crust.
Yeah, whatever you guys want, like we'll do. And then if you actually make that genuine, then that movement has a chance to become very, very strong and powerful. I should know, because I put myself in the hands of the American people. And then, you know, like we raised tens of millions of dollars. I ended up doing thank you to those of you who were in the Yang Gang and the rest of it. So you have to actually give the power back to the people. And technology makes that really easy and straightforward. The issue right now is that the current parties have zero interest in doing that. So if there is a party that decides to do that, and everything I'm describing right now, technically very feasible, the two main things you need ballot access in 50 states. Costs about $20 million, takes about 18 months. We have it in 5 states. So we're just marching around doing the thing. And the second thing you need is an A-list heavyweight to anchor your third-party primary that if they run, then everyone's like, okay. And by the way, if you get that heavyweight, then everyone below that person will sign up like that, because this is the way they want to run. There are so many people, and this goes back to your original question to me, there are so many people who would think about running if they weren't gonna get shivved by the parties for doing so, you know what I mean? That we're gonna have to pretend to believe in things they don't believe. Like if you could run as an independent and you could say, here's who I am, I'm this on this, I'm this on this, and then you could make your case to the American people, you would actually get genuine leaders to step up. So that is a vision that is right there for us. And I will confess to you all, I tried to get this done for this cycle. We're not fast enough, but it is right there for us in 28.
Why won't Trump win?
So I'll be brief. He won't win because the country's demography has changed dramatically. The early polling never matters. You know, Michael Dukakis was ahead at this point. He was ahead 20 points coming out of the primary. The demography has changed dramatically, and so what we do is we get in an echo chamber of our confirmed biases, and we think that he's going to win because the people around us think he's going to win, but the country is very different country today. Second reason why he's not going to win is they're going to run the highlight film of his full-on insanity, and I think people are going to realize, wait a minute, I'll take, you know, like Joe Kernan on CNBC said to me, it's weekend at Joe Biden's. And I said, well, you know what? I would take that over One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Okay, you'll take elderly and forgetful over full-on crazy when it comes down to it on the election day. And the third reason is that the country's doing reasonably well, if not very well. The economic dashboard of the country is great. We do have a border problem that has to be fixed, but let's face it, the president put a foot forward to try to fix it. Trump stopped him. That's the highest level of political expediency. They had a deal on the table. I think that's going to be highlighted towards the end. And the last thing is I really love my country, and I can't imagine that we're going in that direction because he's made it very clear. He says it from the podium, I'm going to persecute my enemies using the Justice Department.
Yeah.
I'm going after journalists that criticize me. I'll shut down FCC licenses of media people that don't like my point of view. He's making this very clear, and he doesn't like democracy. Okay, and if you don't believe me, ask Mark Meadows. who is the chief witness against him in the insurrection case. And Mark Meadows is not a Soros-sponsored, district attorney. He's a white Christian from the Southern Coalition known as the Freedom Caucus, and he's the chief witness in the prosecution against him. So I'm sure I pissed off half of the people here. But the good news, the first curse word came from Andrew Yang, not me. But I don't think he's going to win. And you know what? I said the same thing last time. I said he would win in 16. There's no way he'll win in 20. And I don't see him winning in 24. And we'll see.
So
But if you think he's going to win, stop talking to your friends in an echo chamber. Go out into another group of people and ask them what they think of Donald Trump.
Well, so, I mean, I hope Anthony's right, and we've had this conversation before. But to his point, our votes aren't going to matter here in New York. This election is going to get decided by a handful of independent voters in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia. And if you look at his number, if you look at the race in those states, I don't think it looks good for Joe and the Democrats. But I hope that I would never vote for Donald Trump.
His party wants to take abortion rights away from women. His party's also suggesting that IVF, should be stopped because of religious implications. We don't have to go into all the definitions of it. And they got schmeisted in the midterms because of that. And so you're telling me that the billions of dollars that are going into Joe Biden's campaign and his PAC is not going to highlight that with the suburban women and run highlight films of Trump's impetuosity? Is it insanity? And remember, there are 39 people that work closely with Donald Trump in the White House, in his cabinet. 38 of them have said, no way am I voting for him. Moreover, I may not like Joe Biden's policies, but the country can live with bad policy. They can't live with the ruination of the institutions of the democracy. So maybe, but let me tell you something, there's a lot of road between now and then. I'll tell you what I did last time, Andrew, and I hope you'll join me. I went on talk radio and I went on local news in every swing state for 3 hours a night, starting on September 1st till Election Day. Because the blue collar people, they don't watch CNN, they don't even watch Fox, they spend their time watching the local news. You wanna know why? Because a guy like my father, who was a crane operator, he was checking the weather. They watch the local news for the weather, and then they go to bed. And I will be on the local news. You can join me. And we can explain to these people the menace of Donald Trump.
So I did something very similar in 2020 as a Biden surrogate. I'd be like, local radio, PA, you got it. I campaigned in the swing states. I'll tell you what Forward's going to do to try and keep Trump from winning in November. We have a plan. So our plan is to recruit 300 sane local candidates for city council, school board, town supervisor, with the thesis that any sane local candidate will draw in approximately 50 non-Trump, non-extremist voters who feel like, okay, I have to support my friend who's running. So you have 300 times 50, that's 15,000 non-Trump voters in a race that's probably going to get decided by between 100,000 and 200,000 voters in those 6 states. So that's our plan. We didn't call it, this is a real thing. It's called the reverse coattails effect. So the coattails effect is that everyone follows the top of the ticket. We're going to do the reverse coattails, which is going to get some more people to not vote for Trump by getting their friend to run in their community. So if that sounds like a good plan, you can check it out at forwardparty.com. We're very benign. And this is the thing that pisses me off, is that when you say third party, and Charles got this, I'm sure, all the time, it's just like, spoiler, Ralph Nader, Ross Perot, screw things up for the good guys, whoever the good guys are, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, no, we're not doing that. We're doing very, very positive.
Yeah, overcoming the spoiler effect is really important, because one of the things that animates politics is not just our tribalism, but the fact that we really hate the other tribe more than we even know what our own tribe stands for. So if you introduce a third-party candidate, the fear is, well, what if that person inadvertently elects the person I really can't stand? And that argument is highly effective, and the system reinforces that. So we do have to make some systemic changes that allow for more competition, that will allow those 42 or 46% of voters to have more voice.
Yeah, and ranked choice voting makes that moot. So that's one reason why intelligent folks in this movement are all like, ranked choice voting, nonpartisan primaries, can vote for whomever you want.
Yeah, and while we're looking at the presidency in 2024, there will be a referendum in Nevada, and these state level efforts to do what Alaska did
Yep.
are really important. I did an event with Jake Tapper after the 2020 Alaska referendum, and he didn't even know about it.
No, dude, I spent so much time talking to the folks at CNN, like on set, by the way, because you're like there and you're like, hey, Nevada, question 3, turning off the primaries, 17 million. They're like, oh, don't know what you're talking about. And then you convey it to them. One guy who always knew what I was talking about was John Avlon, who's running for Congress in Long Island. So if you want a candidate who actually walks this walk, John Avlon.
And has thought about this for a very,
very long time. So I'm co-hosting an event for John next week. If anyone wants to come and has money.
Professor, you mind if I get one more Trump punch in for Trump?
He wants to punch.
I don't want to take your airtime, but just remember this. A lot of people are going to be upset with me for saying this, but you're going to remember this. Trump is horrific for Israel. I'm going to explain why, and a lot of you say, oh, no way, but he is, because he is a lapdog for Vladimir Putin. And the Iranians have been helping Vladimir Putin in the Ukraine, supplying weaponry, and the Iranians have been selling oil for the Russians in the black market. And Vladimir Putin has an OZ to the Iranians. And Trump is his lapdog, and you don't have to do derivative math to understand how bad that's going to be for Israel. And now you'll say, oh no, he's a great friend of Israel, but you don't know Trump. He's not a great friend of anybody. Okay, and he spins like a weather vane with no principles. So you remember this, if he wins, you say, well, what the hell's going on, and why is he going after the Israelis and the state of Israel? Remember what I said. Go ahead, Professor, I'm sorry.
I'll wait for my question.
So all of you are super successful. You don't need to be doing anything, but here you are doing all the things that you're doing to try and fix these things. What inspires you to do all this? You first, Professor.
Goodness, I think you're hearing from everybody that crisis is existential. We care about this country. I think you're probably right that all of us have immigrant backgrounds. Well, we're Americans, so you have immigrant backgrounds, which means we deeply care about this country and the institutions that are in it. We believe in them and we believe in the democracy, unlike so many of the people who are running for office. You know, 1/3 of our elected officials in Congress are election deniers. We've got 19 states who are led, either their governor, their Secretary of State, or their Attorney General, who are election deniers. We have a whole host of people who are marshaling now as enemies of democracy. So the crisis here is tremendously existential. What motivates me, though, and what gets me out of bed, though, is that there is so much good that can be done. I'm a true believer in the power of government to fix problems. It has the power of the purse, it has convening power, It has all of these resources. So I want to see us, in addition to focusing again on what happens on that election day, is focusing on what happens the day after. And we have to make these institutions work. We're facing existential crises, as you mentioned at the beginning, climate change being highest on the list, and a long list that comes after them, and we have to do better. So whether it's, if you care about any issue, whether it's AI or whether it's climate or whether it's health,
Poverty.
if you want poverty, inequality, there's a long list. If you care about fixing those issues, what we have to have is institutions that are capable of solving those problems. And without institutions that work, the situation is dire. So I think that's what gets us all out of bed every day, is because we see the possibility for positive change. And that's just one thing I'll tack onto this debate here, is we have so much time that we're spending talking about the horse race of the political parties, who's up, who's down, who's winning, who's losing. And that's a big contributing factor. It's the political parties, yes, but it's also the media that really benefits from covering the horse race and from covering the sport of politics. As a friend of mine once said, if you turned off the volume, you couldn't tell the difference between CNN and ESPN. So the thought here being that we need more positive discussion about ways in which we are solving problems. Where is it working in terms of fixing homelessness, in terms of building better housing, in terms of addressing health and the environment, et cetera? There's lots of positive experiments underway, but you don't hear about them very much because they're just not as exciting. So what gets me out of bed? An unending list of problems to solve and the challenge of doing so.
I like losing money. Because all this does is cost me money and pisses off half the people. That
I will make a pitch for political philanthropy, which is a phrase we've been using.
Dude, yes.
You know, like when you go
Highest leverage
to really rich people and say, you know, in the 1800s we needed libraries and universities and art museums. We got a lot of those now. If you really want to make the world better for your grandchildren, fix the political system so that we can address those problems. And that phrase does resonate.
Yeah, and some really smart people have figured that out, Charles, haltingly. At this point, even Al Gore has said that democracy reform is the necessary precursor to addressing climate change. So I got into this because I wanted to alleviate poverty. I think poverty is unnecessary and pretty dumb. There's like a massive human cost associated with it that is eminently solvable. It might be the most solvable of our major problems. And I can prove it by pointing to 2021 when we actually cut child poverty in half by issuing an enhanced child tax credit. 120 economists said this is the greatest thing we've done in a generation. So of course we undid it in 2022. And child poverty shot up from 5% to 11% again. And when we did that, I was waiting to see, is there going to be any outcry, protests from the millions of American families we just plunged back into poverty? And there was nothing, because it turns out if you're the working poor in America and we give you a leg up for 15 months and then we take it away, you just go back to being desperate and poor, and you probably have no idea who your member of Congress is or where to go or what that protest would even look like. So that is something that has infuriated me, because we actually did the thing and then we couldn't even keep doing it because our political system now is so dysfunctional. And I ran for president on more or less some version of that. I will confess to you all, I just want to get rid of poverty. And so in 2020, between campaigning for the Biden team in the swing states, I was lobbying members of Congress to issue COVID relief and this child tax credit. And they did it, some version of it. And I thought, this is the greatest thing I've ever done. I have helped alleviate poverty for 4 million American children. I can sleep at night. Like I could end my career right now, and I did it. And then they fucking undid it. And like, imagine how that, you know what I mean? And most of you, despite being highly educated, did not know that happened, probably, because something like child poverty is not a reportable issue.
Is that because they don't have lobbyists like Big Pharma and lobbyists like Big Food?
1,000%.
There's
You
no
know this.
advocacy
And it is
for child
true.
poverty?
Anthony is one of the few, and Charles, you're right. Okay, number one, if any of you become really rich in the next number of years, this is the highest leverage form of investment you can make. Because if you can get our government working again, then you can unlock tens of billions of dollars to solve these problems. And Anthony is one of the few political philanthropists in the country. There's a relatively small handful of them that are throwing down, and Anthony's one of them. So please remember that in the progression of your
That phrase
careers.
is going to cost me a big check. I'm gonna read it.
And what does that mean to be a political philanthropist?
I give dough to people like Andrew.
Yeah.
I give dough into areas where I think we're going to move the needle into something that's
The
worthwhile.
people who supported the Alaska referendum, supported the Nevada,
That's
supported
$6
the
billion.
anti-gerrymandering efforts. Yeah, you're just putting your money in political campaigns.
You guys-
Not necessarily candidates, although that can make a big difference,
Yeah.
but structural changes that are likely to change the incentives that will give you either different candidates or candidates who behave differently.
This is a law school, right? So raise your hand if you've heard of the case Plessy versus Ferguson. Anybody remember that case? Okay, so that was a case, for those of you that don't know, where the court said, no problem, blacks and whites, you can have separate but equal facilities. Unmitigated social disaster for the United States. It took 80 years to repeal that case with Brown versus the Board of Education. We have something right now called Citizens United. Anybody familiar with that case? Citizens United is the Plessy versus Ferguson for your democracy. Okay, it's separate but equal democracy. You got $1 billion, you can spend $1 billion anywhere you want, and you can move the needle. Okay, and that is affecting the government. Is there any surprise that Boeing, they moved their corporate headquarters from Seattle to Chicago? They said, wait a minute, we're just not quite close enough. Let's move it to Virginia. Okay, and if you think about the billions of dollars that are spent in lobbying the 535 people in that Congress, it is staggering, and it's painful, and it's why the food is making you fat and the drugs are making you sick, because they're getting paid to do things that are irresponsible, because they want to stay in power.
But now the drugs will make you skinny.
Well, I'm not taking that drug.
All right, last question, and we'll get to some Q&A. You mentioned it earlier. We're seeing a lot of major retirement announcements. Mitch McConnell last week, Nancy Pelosi, with the passing of Dianne Feinstein. We're seeing the baby boomer generation finally sort of loosen that grip over the political reins. And we're seeing millennials and Gen Z starting to come of age as community leaders and leaders in companies, consumers, as voters. And I want to ask you guys, how can these younger generations prepare themselves to become a better civic generation than what we got with the baby boomers, and sort of prepare them to head into this next phase of history that we're going into?
So the stereotypical politician response is like vote, run for office. I'm not gonna say those things. Like I would say demand better than this two-party system. This two-party system is meant to dilute your desires and wishes for the future and then transmute them into something barely recognizable. And that if we don't change that, we're sunk. So when someone says to you, oh no, it's like, okay, I get you don't like the party, but you really have to vote like in this way. It's like, vote in a practical way, that's totally fine. But we have to reform the structure to give your generation a chance. Your generation has been stuck with a $34 trillion bill and counting. And then these people are going to die and leave you the bill. And you should be pissed off. Like that's been the cumulative corruption of multiple generations. And they want to leave you that bill. If you want to get out from under that bill, you have to say, look, this system is not going to do it for me. Like, we need a better one. And Charles has been fighting for that for a long time. I've been fighting for that. Anthony's been funding it. Bet you're going to make things work better after we get there. But that's what I would say, is that you have to be savvier. Because right now, the media industrial complex and social media are trying to manipulate you into saying, look, do something that feels good and like vote for this person because they're good and that person's a jerk. Like that doesn't cut it. Like this system is well beyond that point, because the evil of this system is that if I get that non-jerk in there, you're still going to keep spinning into oblivion. Like, you need something deeper. You have to fight for something deeper. I am fighting to try and give you something deeper.
Yeah, I would agree. There are plenty of really lousy young members of the House and members of the Senate, and they're going to be Chuck Grassley's 30 years from now. They're just as partisan and noxious as the people who came before them. It's got to be systemic. I'd urge you to read Mitt Romney's biography, which is really kind of an autobiography, because he gave his emails and his texts and sat for 40 interviews with McKay Cobbins. And you kind of see him. He was somebody who, maybe belatedly, but started working with Democrats. And he sees all the forces, institutional forces, arrayed against that kind of cooperation. It's a very insightful book. And it will lead you, I hope, to where Andrew got, which is if you don't change the incentives, you're not going to change the outcomes.
So let me chime in and say, especially because we have a lot of students in the room, and I will also not say just the run for office comment that you would expect, is go do public service. So you're already training to be lawyers, which means you know what public interest law is about, but there's a tremendous opportunity to go stay for Jonathan's legal hackathon tonight, because Jonathan in Brooklyn Law School has been really at the center of using technology now for, how many years have you been doing this? A long time, as long as me. Getting students involved in building tech to make government work better. So I have students right now working for a government agency to help when people find grants when they apply to that agency using AI. Or I have another team of students who are now working with governments in California now, helping to take your form that you get, your 100-page complex legalese that you get from your school district when your child has a disability, and they're using AI to help parents translate that into English, summarize it, ask questions of that document so they can advocate for their parent, for their kid, on an equal and level playing field to a parent who has more money. So there are opportunities now while you're in school, but after you leave school, go do a stint in government. It is the most powerful, it's the largest employer in the country. It is the most powerful and wealthiest employer in the country, and it gives you a chance to really move the levers of power.
All right, let's move on to Q&A.
Anthony, how you ended up in the administration to begin with? That's question one. And I remember you, and you looked very happy on the day one. You sound a little different now. I'm just curious. I have no sights in this.
So it's probably too long of a story for tonight, but I'll be as brief as possible. I worked as a Republican Party fundraiser for 30 years. When Jeb Bush left the campaign, I joined Trump. Didn't think he was going to win. By the way, Trump himself didn't think he was going to win. When he won, I was not slated for a job, although I worked on the transition team, and we were incredibly disorganized. And then in the middle of June, he called me. I told him that Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon were very bad guys. I said, watch out for these guys because they don't have your interests at heart. And he called me in the middle of June, and he said I was right. Could you come down here and help me fix it? And then I did the stupidest thing that I've ever done. My wife hates Donald Trump almost as much as Melania hates him. I'm telling you, you have no idea how much she hates him. Okay? And and she was like, "You should not do this." But I let my pride and my ego into the decision-making process. And there are young students in here, and you should really listen to this. Do not put your pride and your ego into your decision-making. And so when Trump called me as the President of the United States, I built 2 successful businesses in the United States, came from a blue-collar family, and now I had a chance to work for the American president. But my wife Deirdre said, but the American president is batshit crazy. And I said, no, it's okay. He's the American president. I'm going to go down there and work for him. When I got there on the first day, Spicer quit, so they asked me to do the press conference. That turned out to be the worst thing for me because the press conference was very well rated, and that pissed Trump off like you could not possibly imagine because he doesn't like other people being in the spotlight. And so if you ask General Kelly, who fired me 11 days later, I got fired because I was getting too much attention, and I was also fighting with him on issues that I can't get into due to national security and confidentiality. But I'm just letting you know, whether it's Tillerson, Mattis, Kelly, you pick the people that worked closely with him. None of them will support Donald Trump for this presidency. Okay, none of them. Every one of them would say to you that the policies of Joe Biden, whether you like him or dislike him, are better than the potential destruction of the institutions of the government. Okay, so I was happy in the beginning, but I was self-absorbed, and it was a very egocentric decision. And so that doesn't reflect well on me to these young people to tell you the truth like that, but I'm saying it for a reason. Okay, don't let your ego and your pride get in the middle of your decision.
If the president calls you like that, it's hard, man. I mean, there are a lot of people that said yes to various presidents.
It's hard, but now I'm running for re-election on my marriage. Okay, it was very hard. Trust me.
The president hasn't called me yet.
Well, don't take a call from the orange.
I mean, I've gotten calls. It's weird. It's a weird dynamic. You feel almost obligated to say yes, Mr. President, like whatever they're calling you about. It's weird. Anyway, so I don't blame you personally.
Well, we've got them captive. Try to make the questions provocative. Okay, go in here.
Is it microphone?
AI might prove to be the most advanced propaganda tool that we've seen so far. It's hard to know what we're thinking. It's hard to know what we believe. How do you believe you're all free thinkers, and how do you think we can be free thinkers ourselves?
I think that's to Andrew first. I'll answer it.
Yeah,
but,
I think I'm a free thinker, yeah, for sure. And one way to be more confident you're a free thinker is to say I'm a political independent, and then you'll find yourself forming points of view that are a little bit more free of dogma and orthodoxy. Now, I think that being concern about AI is eminently correct right now. I think this is going to be the AI cycle. I think we're going to see all sorts of crazy deep fakes down the stretch. And one of the strange things about the human brain is that you can't unsee something after you've seen it. They tell you, hey, that was a fake. You're like, okay, I'll just scrub that from my memory. You actually still remember it. And the incentives are powerful, where you can manipulate the stock market and then make money off it, and no one knows who did it. I mean, it's an increasingly dangerous, noxious environment. Now, I like the positive possibilities around AI too. I mean, it could improve the human condition. It could cure previously incurable diseases, could lengthen our lifespans. I mean, there are a lot of great things. But I think for the political environment, it's going to be very, very dangerous. And so one of the things I'm going to suggest to you all is to take everything with a massive grain of salt in the last 4 weeks. And you might even want to turn off your social media feed, because I think your social media feed is going to have some madness in it for the last 4 weeks.
Look, all of the companies that own these large language models and produce them are privately owned. Their incentive is not to safeguard our democracy. Their incentive is to make a profit. So that's why, Alondra Nelson and Julia Angwin just put out this study this week that showed that if you ask any of these major platforms electoral information, they get it wrong. So that's absolutely true, and we will see a lot of challenges, but I think it's why critical literacy has never been more important, and we really missed the boat on educating the American public around the internet, around social media when we did it, and that's why that education is so important now. So one of the things I'm spending my time on now is running a program to teach all public servants about AI. So starting with government and then working our way out, because there are so many positive opportunities, but there are risks. But you're not going to know how to recognize them and you're not going to know how to regulate them if you don't know how the technologies work. I was in a room 2 weeks ago with 150 lawyers, actually before that, 300 regulators in a room, and I asked, how many people here have tried ChatGPT? You want to guess how many hands went up? 300 people? 2. These are people who are going to be responsible for regulating these technologies. Last week, 150 lawyers in the room, again, very senior legal professionals with significant responsibilities in government. 1 hand went up. So I think the education is so important, and we cannot let the risks cause us to put our heads in the sand and say, oh, we're not going to learn about this. These technologies are here. They're here to stay. If you look at the market, they're very much here to stay. So we have to learn how to use them, and we have to learn how to use them critically.
A couple Zoom questions.
Yes, thank you all for your ideas. One that you put forward is how to capture the non-voter. The non-voter, 140 million. How do you do that in this country? We either mandate it or we incentivize it. I mean, can you incentivize it with a tax credit, for example? Can you mandate it with not renewing your driver's license or something like that? How do you do that in this country? And presumably, it's going to benefit Democrats more. I'm just throwing it out there because most of the people who don't vote are in the lower levels. How do you achieve that?
Well, first I want to say that what percentage of Americans graduate from college? It's about 35%. So if you think that more people are voting now, because the parties have split in an interesting way, where working class, non-college educated Americans are more likely to vote Republican now. And so it's not clear who spreading the franchise out would benefit. I think there's a knee-jerk that's going to be Democrats. I had a concrete proposal when I was running for president. Some of you are going to dislike it. It's fine. But I think, it was to lower the voting age to 16, which would then make it so that juniors and seniors in high school could vote. Studies have shown that the earlier you vote, the more likely you are to get in the voting habit and pattern. You would normalize voting at the high school level. People say, well, if you're 16, you're not an adult, you can't think. And I was like, well, you can drive a car, you can pay taxes. So I feel like it's a reasonable threshold to vote. Also, a lot of people who can vote right now aren't exactly taking high information quizzes, but when they go in, it's like there are a lot of people who are voting on very limited information. So that's one way that you could draw a line that might help, that doesn't involve making mandatory voting as an idea. If my internet voting becomes a reality, I'm going to suggest that might increase the vote rate. That Anthony said earlier that both Obama and Trump increased the franchise by appealing to some folks who are checked out of politics. That's another way, maybe. So, by the way, I had that experience when I ran, that there were a lot of folks who supported me who were not traditionally political because they liked the idea of the magical Asian man from the future giving everyone $1,000 a month. Who were like, I'm on board for that. And so I got a lot of folks coming in who weren't political, and that's another possibility.
I think it's going to have to be more intrinsic. I'm not opposed to some of these incentives to get people to vote, but we need to get back to a time and a place when people vote, and as a result of their vote, something happens that makes their life better, right? And it's back to a proof of concept. And that's what we keep coming back to Alaska, which is you have this referendum, and then almost immediately it has this impact, electing Mary Peltola, re-electing a senator who voted to convict Trump. And so in a very short period of time, people can tell, like, I supported this referendum. It also had profound effects at the state level.
Yeah.
First balanced budget without going overtime, and as long as anyone can remember. So wow, I voted for that. We got new people, and they behaved differently all in like 2 years.
Yeah.
And so we got to get back to, like, I voted for this, and now there are no potholes. I voted for this, and we have an AI plan that makes sense. So absent that, you can make people go to the polls, but you can't make them think that it's going to make a difference in their life.
I'm going to say one word, and that's hope. And I think whether you like it or not, Obama represented that, and weirdly, to a very large group of people that felt like they were left out of the system. Trump still represents that. He is an avatar for their anger. They don't like the system. Wait a minute, the system's not working for me. When I landed in Albuquerque, New Mexico for the first time with Donald Trump, and one of the people there said to me, hey, you think you're in New Mexico? You're not in New Mexico. New Mexico, that would be Mexico. Because our factory moved there, and I lost my job, and so did my dad. And these people feel economically desperational. My dad felt economically aspirational as a blue-collar worker. And so when you're providing hope, and they can actually believe in you, you can expand the market. And Trump and Obama, again, like or dislike those two political figures, they provided that for a segment of the population.
So this is one of the major problems, Charles, is that it used to be that we would vote on how we thought the economy was performing, and now your perception of the economy actually is primarily tinged by which party you prefer, where literally, like, you just change the administration and then like, I think the economy is good or bad, even though nothing has changed because literally they haven't even gotten in there yet to change anything. So my current approach is to say we should give the loser of the race a replica of the White House to move into, and then just have everyone in that half of the country tune in and just be happy. And then you'd have both sides be happy because they could just change the channel and be like, oh, my president's doing their thing. And then everyone would think the economy was doing well. But this is one of the primary problems now, is that perception is spinning into the way people are experiencing reality.
One more, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah. Let's tie a couple of threads here. Who's back to the younger generation? We say America. Use the mic with people on that. We say America is treated like a startup, but you guys have worked at startups. You're a founder. You're fighting every single day to succeed. We then have the 94% that want to maintain their jobs. How do you get a younger generation moving up in government to avoid wanting to have that stability? Whereas you get older, you get more tenured, you want that stability, so people are going to fight to keep their jobs. We need innovators in government. How do you actually get innovators to want to fight every single day to maintain their job?
I'm going to cite a friend of yours named Jen Palka. Do you know Jen? She's like your colleague, right?
Yep.
So she wrote a book called Recoding America about the incentives within government and try and improve them. But it's what Anthony said about his dad, is that if you have a mindset of abundance and possibility and optimism, then people will embrace change. Then if you want to be a change maker, then people will say, yeah, let's do what you're saying. The opposite of that is a mindset of scarcity, of defensiveness, of insularity, of if you're doing well, then I hate you, and that's bad for me. Now, I'm going to ask you all, which one is winning? You know, I'm hard pressed, and this is as someone who is very can-do and in this space. I feel like scarcity is generally winning in the U.S. People are getting increasingly fearful that, like, when this disruption comes. I'll actually tell you guys a funny story. But so I was a CNN contributor, and CNN said, "Hey, we'd like to do a TV show with you called The Future Of, like the future of education, the future of medicine, the future of transportation." And then COVID happened. They did some testing and blah blah blah, and they said, "Hey, it turns out that people don't like the future." And I was like, interesting. So they're like, we're going to come up with another idea for you. Now, that is, by the way, that's a real story. I mean,
Well, there's the Mark Twain line. It's like, I really like progress. It's change I don't like.
So the question is, how can you introduce a higher level of optimism, abundance, and entrepreneurialism, so that people like change and dynamism? Right now, that is not the case for most Americans. And that's something that I understand and get. It's one reason why I ran on universal basic income, these other things. It's like, look, guys, like most of you have these daily exigencies and you have this boot on your throat. And if I'm going to talk to you about climate change, you have a boot on your throat, you're not going to listen. So I got to get the boot off your throat first, and then we can start talking. I think too many Americans still have the boot on their throat. Even people who are doing quite well, if you look at their income, they fear. You know what I mean? Like we have friends in that situation where it doesn't necessarily map to your education or income level. It maps to the culture of your environment.
Yeah, I think you have to tell young people, you have to remind them of the history, which is this was a flawed country when it was founded, but you have to disabuse people of this idea that, it's been a terrible place, it was founded by slaveholders, nobody's getting any better, and this is all objectively untrue. And go back and say, look, it was founded, there are blind spots, the Federalist Papers are nonetheless a brilliant document, the Constitution's a brilliant document. We, over the period of 200 years, the arc of justice, or the arc of history, does bend toward justice with lots of lurching along the way. But people of color are better. Women have greater rights. There is no country in the history of civilization that has opened its doors to so many people from so many places, by the way, where their systems are not working so great. Like you dig on the immigration problem, is because people are fleeing really bad things. And they think this is a great place to be because it is. So I think you have to reconcile that, wow, there's a lot of work to be done, but we have been doing that work for a long time, and either do the work or stop complaining about it.
I think that's a good note to end on. Let's give a round of applause for our speakers.